This is my mini mill jig, and what it is just a half-inch piece of plywood down here base with a strip of plywood as a cleat to go into the table saw. And you've got a couple of strips of some hardwood material here, some 1/4-inch bolts that are screwed down to the base. Got two of them in this view here. I got another one right here that this jig will accept 3. The idea is that I've got a couple of other holes drilled into the base, and you can adjust the clamps, these clamps, to those 3 different positions, and to fit different widths of material that you want to mill out. And the length of this mill is about I think it's about 24 inches. But you could change the length to be whatever you want. I'll probably end up making another one of these, a much bigger one later. Oh, it looks like it's more like about 30 inches long. Something that I'll make one later that would be something I could mill 8-foot sections of wood. This is just little sections of wood to try it out and see how well it works. The idea is you take your work piece here, which is a piece of figured maple. I'm going to be cutting out a pattern in it. It's just like the Chevy icon, and this distance right here is 3.5 inches, and so I set this to be just over that. This distance from here to here. And this is your cutting surface right here. So really, once you get that, and I just measure from this point here to the other side of the wood. And once you get that set up, I already kind of set it up where I wanted it, so I just really need to just tighten it down. So that's the idea here, is you just tighten it down. I forgot to mention, there's just a piece of scrap wood over here on this side as a support for this clamp. And the idea there is that with this long bolt is, later when I flip this thing over, I can adjust these clamps up higher. I can add more scrap wood to raise the clamp up, and I'll show that in a little bit. Right now I'm going to cut this piece off. Now you've got a straight edge right there, and it is going to be perpendicular to this base of the jig. What I did was I took the workpiece and I flipped it up on its edge. This was the edge that was first cut, and this is the surface that was flush against the plate. And to do that, I raised up the clamp part on these 1/4-inch bolts. I added some more scrap material over here on this side, and then one thing I usually do is check for square. That this work piece here is perpendicular to this surface here, and then also usually when I tighten these down, I don't tighten them down too hard. Tighten them down too hard, it will flex this plate, and then you'll be off of square. So I just tighten them down just enough to hold it in place. I've got my table saw set up so that it's as high as it can go. It's a small table saw, so I'm not going to be able to cut this entire height in one pass. It'll only cut up to about here. And what I did was I shifted this piece here so that it's the bottom surface is just overhanging the bottom plate right here. So just a little bit, along the whole entire length, because the workpiece is, this is a rough cut piece of wood, so it's got a little bit of wave to it. Can't be perfectly straight. So you want to take that into account, when you're overhanging it over the edge to make that cut. So I made that cut here. You can see where it stopped right here. I cut this surface flat with that mini mill, and then I flipped it over, and then I cut this surface here perpendicular to that first surface, but because this board is wide, I couldn't do the complete pass. So I've got this extra material right here that I need to cut out first, I need to deal with actually, but before I do that, I've got to cut this other side surface here and make that parallel to this first surface. And the way I do that is I take a small strip of wood, and then that's thicker than, I don't know if you guys can see that, but there's a little lip right there. So I take this piece of material right here, and I can slide it right up against that little lip. And this material here is thicker, right? So then I can lay it into my table saw, and now what I'll have is I'll have two surfaces that are perfectly flat and perpendicular to each other. So I could run that through the table saw, and I can cut this surface out here on the side and make it parallel to that first surface I cut here. I've cut this side here. That's the third cut on this side here, so it'll be parallel to the first cut that I made and perpendicular to the second cut down here on the bottom. And I've got my spacer piece here, and again, that's just because this is extra wide part. If this wasn't so wide, I really wouldn't need that spacer at all. It adds a little bit extra work where the piece is wider than what I can cut in the table saw. So really the next step is going to be to cut this surface out here, which this surface is not flat at all. You know, this is still rough cut. This side over here has part of it that's flat, and then part of it that's still rough cut. So what needs to happen as the next step is to flip this piece over. You can see how it is right here. To flip it over and place it into the side or the fence of the table saw. Adjust the fence so that it is going to be cutting off the slightest amount of material as you can from this other side over here. And this side actually looks pretty close to being flat. So yeah, might take a little trial and error there to figure out how much material you need to cut off. And then then of course you're going to want to raise up the table saw blade just as high as it'll go. Cut out that surface right there. You can see that it again doesn't cut all the way to the top. Things get a little easier at this point, I think, because now that this surface right here is nice and flat relative to this surface and even this surface, I can just flip this over like this. And now let me actually show you over on this side. The cut right here is actually sitting above where the top of the fence is, right? So now I can slide that through. I don't need any spacer or anything like that in there anymore. I can just slide that through like I would do a normal piece of wood. And the idea there is I can take out this over here, this surface right here. So there, I just need to adjust my fence. This surface here now is completely flat. Took a little bit of dialing it in, to get that second cut down here on the bottom. See, I lowered the table saw blade to get that second cut right here perfectly flat, or perfectly in line with the top cut that I did. But you really can't even feel it. I mean, it just takes a couple of just quick minor adjustments there to get it perfectly flat. So really then, I've just got one last surface right here to cut. in there because this guy is perfectly flat now. I just flip it over and I just run it through here. I've got to again do a little adjustment there to get the blade nice and flush with this surface right here. The next step, I'm going to cut off one of the ends of these, just cut it off on the ends, and I'm going to check for square. What I'm going to do to check for square is check the distance from corner to corner on one side, and then check the distance on the other corner to corner, and if they are the same, then you know you're square. This is 4.021 on this side. If I check this side, trying to do it the same way, same spot, as close as I can. So 4.015. So that's a difference of 6 thousandths. That is very square on that end, at least. So that worked. So yeah, was able to, you know, take a piece of rough cut material and square it up starting with that mini mill jig, and then finishing it up with the table saw. With the, you know, this is kind of the more difficult case again, because the width of this is bigger than the table saw can handle. If it wasn't, the process would go a lot quicker.